to have about 25 or 30 minutes for questions and answers. So if I could ask our four presenters to take seats up behind the table. And I usually, when we do the Q&A, I think it's best if I just sit down and people raise their hands, and I'll let the panelists sort of call on whoever they think looks interesting to them. Okay. And Anne is going to bring around a microphone. So, and let me just, if you do ask a question, two things. Number one, wait for Anne to bring the microphone over. And number two, please be sure to introduce yourself, your name and your affiliation. You're being videotaped, so we all want to know who you are. Okay, questions. Who wants to start?
Well, thank you, speakers. It has been totally enlightening morning. And I have a question for Dr. Suk-ja Jo. That was the Chinese, the enactment or restaging of Chunyang is very fascinating. And I think that China has sort of a unique advantage to make something unique. Because of the Joseonjok people who also have a shared knowledge of that, and also, you know, like a lot of historical reason. But one thing I noticed is that toward the end you show the 2014 the production, and I noticed that they are using all this mixed costuming. The police people are wearing Chinese Beijing opera sort of costumes. Is there a certain political meaning, I mean, given the situation with Dongbuk-gongjeong and everything? So what is their sort of political ideology behind it? Thank you.
I think that's a very fascinating question. And I also had the same question, but I haven't solved I got the answer. When I looked at other different operatic forms, each version has different combination. Sometimes they apply more Korean costumes. Sometimes they apply the Jingji, the Peking opera style the costumes. So I'm still looking for the answer, but I'm pretty sure the increased number of the articles on Chunyang in China, and also the very extravagant representation of the scenes based on Chinese opera models have something to do with Dongbuk-gongjeong, the Dongbuk-gongjeong. That's my speculation, but I have not yet to have the evidence. So thank you for the right.
So this question, my name is Liana Chen. I am assistant professor in Chinese literature and language at GW. So, well, first of all, thank you so much for very fascinating presentations. And this question is for Suk-ja. And also, it may have something to do with the first question. So I'm really interested in, never seen any, but very interested in the 1954 Yuezhi opera production by the very famous Yuezhi opera singers Xu Yulan and Wang Wenjuan. Their performances are just fascinating. I find it interesting that they sort of emphasize, as you explained, love and romance or love and emotion, more than things like class struggle or any political implications. And I wonder, given the historical and political context of the time, why did this happen? And something very interesting that I noticed is also that in a later time, for example, when Chinese operatic troops adapted Shakespearean plays, sometimes, I think during the recent time, it becomes the case that they would sort of take out the foreign historical context and sort of implant the story into ancient Chinese history. But that didn't happen with this particular production. That is, they still keep the Korean historical context as the base of the story. They didn't make any attempt to make it a Chinese story. So I wonder if that might be an explanation for their attempt to try to focus less on the political side of the story and trying to romanticize it more. It's just my theory.
That's why I brought in this Chunxiang character from traditional Chinese literature. The differences I could see in this adaptation, Chinese adaptation, is that they saw this story as not so different from their own love stories, like Liang Shang Bo Zhu Ying Tai, and I compared each text. That they use the same languages sometimes. When the scene they met first time, they used the same literary trope that was pretty common in Chinese literature. So what I'm saying is, to Chinese audiences, that this Chunxiang Zhan, Chunxiang Zhuan, was one of the similar kind to the Chinese audience, but still has Korean traits. You asked about why the political environment at the time, why this particular opera was popular during the time, and I briefly mentioned the political situation at the time. Mao Zedong and Zhou Enlai particularly loved this village opera form in 1950s, and then they actually went to see the Xixiangji and Liang Shang Bo Zhu Ying Tai performances. And then the war happened, 1950 to 1953, and then they sent the village opera troops to North Korea to console the Chinese soldiers on the North Korean area, and then North Korean people also watched these films, and then this kind of collaboration happened. The North Korean troop wanted to learn this from village opera groups, and also village opera groups also wanted to learn some Korean repertories. So there are some political reasons at the beginning, but that's the common explanation of this popularity of the tale. But I thought it a little bit different idea, and my view was beyond that there are this long history, and the Chinese audiences particularly like this Chunxiang story, the love element, how they met and how they part, and then how they united. That's kind of very popular theme in Chinese romance literature. So I'm not sure. You said that they didn't make it as a Chinese story, but I think they made a Chinese story. That's a little bit different point of view, and they just added Korean elements just a little bit. But as you see, I think the basic setting is Chinese. But to them, to most audiences I met, they don't care whether that's really Chinese and Korean stories. They really like the love themes and how they the one big difference I didn't mention in the presentation is Chunhyang in Korean version, Lee Mong-yong and the corrupted official, the Byun-hak-do, they just wanted Chunhyang at the beginning because she's pretty. But in Chinese versions, Chunhyang is presented as beautiful, not just beautiful, literally talented. Her gesture is very elegant. So she's just representative, right? The female idea. So the Chinese versions all elaborate this Chunhyang character as the Chinese ideal, the woman. So from those little details, I felt that they made it like Chinese Chunhyang. So that's my speculation. And there are other contexts of, how the Shakespeare's, right? A drama was adapted in China, but this is a little bit placed in different position. And then maybe it has to something like Gaiga language we had at the time as well.
But that's actually a Korean idea too. So.
Yeah.
I've been secretly ordered to return and call on the people, but please.
My name's Marilyn Merritt, and I'm from GW in the Department of Anthropology.
And I have a question that's probably directed more towards Emmanuel Kim, but you also have all dealt with this sort of change in what happens with female as time goes on. And you sort of alluded to this, Emmanuel, but when the woman, the mother, is having the encounter with the young man, and he is asking and she is negotiating for it, one thing that occurs probably to many of us who are, older and further is like, well, could she not demand to negotiate with this man's father, who is obviously going to be the one who's saying, oh, what you tell them doesn't make any difference. So I would like you to consider, or perhaps speak to the issue of the ritual between the male and the female. Even though the woman is demanding more than she might have, write it down, something that will give you more potential. Is there something that is there that she cannot, say, demand to negotiate with the father, or what are the limits to her ritual negotiation that will be allowed?
Thank you for the question. I actually don't know. I'm not a specialist in this area, and I had to look up some of these terminologies that they used in the film. I asked my wife, what does yungnae mean? The term, one of the terms that, the 6 rites, right? The 6 kind of steps to engagement, right? I didn't even know what that was, and I'm not sure. So they do talk about the ritual, definitely, between the marriage ritual, but they never elaborate on it because everything is done behind their backs, right? So that's the sort of the beauty of the story, because if it was a legitimate marriage, then I'm not sure if the new governor who would come in later would be able to take advantage of Chunyang the way he did, or the way he wanted to. But because everything was done behind these parents' back, I think the story is able to unfold the way it did. But I really have no other. I don't know. I got to think about this. I'm sorry. Yeah.
Anybody else? Because it plays, yeah.
Yungne, the 6 steps of marriage is very important. The Yangban class, the ritual is very important. So in case of the film, I newly know about that. The subject of the decision of the marriage is depending on the Wolme, Chunyang's mother, and Idoryong. But depending on the novel version, fiction version, in case of Namon-gosa, Chunyang and Idoryong directly negotiate or communicate each other without Wolme. So in the novel version, the subjectivity is very strongly owned the Chunyang also, like the Idoryong. So it is very important, the North Korean version film, the interpretation of the decision making. Who is the important decision power? Wolme, his mother, who is very important because influenced from the Kim Il-sung's mother. Maternity is very important, but in the Joseon period or in South Korea, the female's subjectivity is more enforced. So it was very various. So which version is the characterized the person, every character? It is very important. But the North Korean version, motherhood is enforced, so the role of Chunyang was minimized than South Korea, I thought.
Actually, I have related questions. So again, I'm not an expert in Chunyang, but by accident, actually, I read the newspaper articles which covers the recent scholarship of Chunyang in South Korea, and actually scholars these days actually pay attention to the eroticism or female sexuality, very boldly expressed in the original, especially vernacular Korean version of Chunyangjeon. But later, actually, the commentators and scholars kind of try to not hide, but kind of mute those aspects and so on. So, can you comment on this kind of the female sexuality or the eroticism of Chunyangjeon of the original version, which is kind of an maternal kind of
But when we talk about Chunyangjeon, the original version is something dangerous term because every version of Chunyangjeon has all their originality. It was communication between the period and also the text and the main story. But every version of the Chunyangjeon until now, the writer's interpretation to the history and culture of the time, they mediatedly use the old version of Chunyangjeon. The main story is very simple, romantic. But it was reflected lots of contemporaneousness. They reflect their own interpretation to the history and also the social phenomenon or political problems. So I don't use the original version because we don't know what is the firstly produced or created in Joseon society. So it was sometimes it is meaningless, the terms of original version. So every version is the interpretative way of recreating or rewriting the Chunyangjeon. They also remark or speech to the public as a own creative version. So Chinese version. Okay, we listen to a Chinese version. But you said Chunyang's elegant gesture is very touched the love sign to the appeal to the human, and also the Joseon traditional version, various version, the Chunyang is very intelligent or very sexual. But many people thought the Kiseng is only sexual woman. Kiseng didn't express or have the social power to politically remark. But in Chunyang version, she is radically 고발하다, radically criticized the political corruption. So very ironically, Chunyang insists she is wife of Lee Do-ryong, but the main role of a woman as a wife in Joseon period, she should have a baby or educate a baby, but she did not. Chunyang, no experience to have give birth, and also she didn't any raise a child. She only insists, I love him. Love power, he insists. It is very radical.
What's the nature of love? It's more kind of platonic. Union was more kind of.
Yes, it is very westernized. Something westernized interpretation. In Asia, the main role of a woman as a wife, give birth, and also raise a child. But Chunyang didn't. She just love a man and keep her chastity. Yes. Yes, so she is a very revolutionary character. But in the North Korea, I was wondering how they interpreted Chunyang's character, her love romance. It was very cultural history. It was very important and revolutionary and subversive, insistent as a woman.
So you talk about how the Chunyang character is so complex, right? Not just.
Right. There's a common understanding or a perception that North Korean materials, film or fiction, is very prude. It doesn't show the sexuality of women. This is actually not true. North Koreans are very sexual, like everyone else, right? The 1980 version of Chunyang, yes, has this very chaste, very prude image of Chunyang. Whereas when Shin Sang-ho came in and recreated this film, he showed how the husband-to-be, Lee Mong-yong, was desiring Chunyang by licking his lips. So it's a very visible, right? Very visible carnal desire for Chunyang. And then once Shin Sang-ho made that film, people said, wow, Shin Sang-ho broke all the rules in North Korea and made this film very sexual. Well, a 1953 version of Chunyang, The Tale of Chunyang, in North Korea, not the filmic version, the novel version, in 1953, very sexual, where the first night, Lee Mong-yong tells Chunyang, essentially, take off your clothes. And she does. And he lusts over her, right? So it's very visible there, right? And you're thinking, wow, North Korea, 1953, what's going on here? It's very sexual. Well, then again, it's wartime, right? Maybe people are hungry for something, right? I don't know, right? But this idea or the notion that North Korea is deprived of sexuality is a misconception.
In the local version, Lee Do-ryung talked to Chunyang, take off your clothes. Then Chunyang mentioned to the Lee Do-ryung, take off you too. In the film version, it's also the same?
No, not the film version.
Oh, okay. It is very important. South Korean version and old Joseon version, their relationship is very equal. Chunyang and Lee Do-ryung.
Well, thank you for your very rich answers. I do think that the idea of the ritual interaction really gives you another lens to explore some of these things that you've already been talking about.
Other questions? Catherine.
Hi, my name is Catherine. I am a PhD student in the History Department at the George Washington University. Thank you so much for all the wonderful presentations, but I have a specific question for Professor Seo.
Oh,
yeah.
I didn't expect that.
I found your topic really interesting, probably because it's involved in Japan somehow. I become very cynical when it comes to Japan, right? It's not because I hate Japanese people, but when it comes to sort of like a government motive, I tend to be more critical. But I think one of the reasons why so many people from different parts of the world found Chunyangjan very interesting is because it has a sort of like universal theme such as love. But besides that, if you actually think about it, I want to move a little bit away from sort of like epistemological problems that we have discussed. But I want to focus more on story. So if you look at the story, kind of it breaks the traditional sort of Korean aristocratic or kind of a social hierarchy. And you can kind of see it as a kind of becoming more democratic society, but also it breaks the Korean tradition. And also if you look at Chunyang's character, there's a kind of a submissiveness. Well, Professor Chess said he was not really like that, but it's like the loyalty and the submission. Japanese government could really kind of utilize that as a characteristics of Korea, and especially when they claim that Koreans could be should be an equal subject under Japanese emperor. I know the intellectuals that you mentioned. You said that they're leftists and radicals, but I thought those could be great, sort of in a way propaganda to kind of have a control over Korea. I just want to hear your opinion about that.
That's interesting, actually. So it depends.
If you can just wait for the mic.
Right. So I think it's an interesting point because, as you know, Chunyangjan there are many versions of Chunyangjan's, many editions of Chunyangjan's, but the Chunyangjan story is a literary text, so it's subject to many different possible interpretations. So what is at issue is how to interpret the loyalty, right? Loyalty one's husband, one's spouse, right? It can be interpreted as the way, in the way actually you just presented actually. It can be a kind of seen as a loyalty to the kind of legitimate government or legitimate authority, your spouse, right? But also in 춘향전, Chunyang suffers at the hands of very corrupt government official, right? So that's the kind of I give more focus in my presentations. Right? So that's why there's Fusetachi, this civil rights lawyer, Japanese lawyer. Actually, he was awarded by the South Korean government in 1960s for his endeavors to defend Korean independent activists and so on. Anyhow, so this guy actually read kind of subversive or resistance kind of aspects of Chunyangjeon into that fact that Chunyang suffers at the hands of kind of unlegitimate government official. So and text itself is open to different interpretations. That's how I look at text, because as a literary scholar, that's one of the reasons I kind of defected from history to literature. I told you I got my PhD in history, and I felt kind of very constricted. Historians, they're obsessed with kind of objective kind of perspective. What is truth and truth? But for me, truth can be it can be malleable. It can be changeable. So I think that's very interesting insight. Thank you.
Okay, we have a question over here.
Frank Joseph Schulman. My question is about the critical reception of the translations, of the performances of the films. Is there much information available about the critical reception in terms of reviews that were published in, whether it was in newspapers or magazines? And if not, is this a topic that is worthwhile exploring?
Yeah, in North Korea it's very difficult because the newspapers are state-run. So you're not going to have an opinion piece. And they tend to avoid negativity. Oh, that was a poor performance. No, every performance is a positive performance. Especially when Kim Il-sung says it's a great performance. You'll never go against what Kim Il-sung says. Same thing with Mao, yes. I'm assuming it's the same thing, right? And when Kim Jong-il saw the filmic production and the stage theatrical production, and he said, this is good. Like God saying, this is good on the seventh day or something, right? That's going to be written in stone, right? That's going to be good till the end of the human era, right? And anyone who opposes that will be, that's not right. So it's very difficult to get a honest reception or feedback, critical remark from the public.
If nobody else wants to respond, we have another question from this gentleman over here.
Well, I'm a retired physician, but I'm studying ancient history of Korea. It's a question to Emmanuel Kim. Dan Lee, I go by pen name Mosul. Emmanuel Kim. The North Korea, the propaganda is a key. Their fake news, whatever. There's a great case to promote their patriotism. As you know, around 37 AD, 호동 왕자와 낭랑공주. It's a 유명한 얘기입니다. It's a famous love story. Young lady fell in love and destroyed the old defense system in the country to fulfill their love. And prince died, they invade country, they destroyed. So it will be great themes. Have they ever used that theme to propagate the patriotic feeling for the audience in North Korea? I might be too old for passion.
I knew this was going to happen. Like, once I say I do North Korean stuff, everything on North Korea comes to me, right? I'm not a specialist in everything in North Korea. I actually deal mostly with contemporary modern North Korean literature. And one of the things that, if I can answer your question tangentially, one of the things that I've noticed over the years, over the decades in North Korean literature, is this U-turn to tradition and reclaiming history and rewriting historiography in a way to support and create this nationalism in North Korea. And this is a practice that South Koreans do too, but we see this, China as well, yeah, so every country I think, right? So, but this is very visible in North Korea. Now, so do they use old tales to support contemporary political? Absolutely, right? They use that all the time. Do they use that particular story? I don't know. I haven't looked into that particular story, but I wouldn't be surprised. So I'm sorry I can't answer your question to your satisfaction, but yes, sorry.
Okay, are there any other questions? We have time for about one more before we break for lunch. This gentleman over here.
My name is Ki-Han Kim. I'm an engineer, therefore my questions most likely will be off the mark. I have a question for Professor Cho. One of the, if I understood correctly, first adaptation of Chunhyang in China was 1906. So that was from Taiwan, I think, right? So Taiwan at that time was Japanese occupation. And you said he was influenced by Japanese, maybe based on the record in Japan, yet he wrote very factually incorrect statements in the story, right? So distorted the fact. And I was wondering, does that mean in Japan at that time also distorted Chunhyang-jun in different ways? So that was my question. I have another question, not question, but comments on Emmanuel. If I observed correctly, Hong Seung-gi's version of this Wolmes negotiation, Chunhyang was not at present. The other two films, all three were together. So do you have any meaning for that?
Thank you for your question. So 1906 adaptation was based on Japanese edition. That's already proven correct. But just use the tale, the storyline from the Japanese version. So the Japanese version, this Chinese writer used didn't have the modified parts, the character, added character, and the changed plot. It didn't have it. So, okay. So far, I checked the Japanese version, but they don't have this variations that the Chinese writer brought in his adaptation. But he was actually a news reporter, and he worked with many Japanese writers. He was also participated in translating that the particular Japanese version was being printed. He was also worked for that. So he knew that Japanese version of A Tale of Chunhyang, but that that Japanese Chunyang version was published later than his own adaptation in 1906. So it took time for scholars to figure out, but he was in the process at the beginning, but he didn't really, follow the Japanese adaptation. That's what I discovered so far.
In your newspaper article, there was a photograph in the middle of the newspaper article.
That's I think it's something.
What that photograph was?
Oh no, I have no clue. That newspaper happened to be discovered in 2013. So scholars still trying to find out. But
I was wondering whether it's related to Chunyang or not. Namuan, or if I read correctly, the title indicates that it was Nikko, which is a outskirt of Tokyo, where it's a famous.
I didn't relate that picture actually to the tail.
Well, that's a very shrewd observation. It didn't occur to me the actual physical presence of Chunyang in some of the films and not. I don't think it's a matter of South Korean version and a North Korean version, because in the South Korean version, Shin Sang-wook's version in South Korea, Chunyang is not present either, right? And Shin Sang-wook's version in North Korea, she's actually not present. Oh, I mean, during the negotiation contract writing, she is, but the initial contact with Wolme and Mongyeong, Chunyang is not present. So it's a very interesting question. I got to think about it a little bit more. And this whole idea that someone earlier brought up of this idea of female subjectivity and where Chunyang is situated in that, right? Her presence/absence is a very interesting take. So yeah, thank you for that. I'll think about that a little more.